Hey, Composer Gloves here, and this is the first video in FL effects. And the reason I'm doing them on effects like this is because a lot of them are kind of small and don't really need a whole separate series to cover the whole plugin. On things like Edison, I probably will do a whole separate series just because Edison is a beast. It could do all sorts of insane things. But today we're going to be covering the Parametric EQ2. And so just go ahead and open one of those up, and let's really quick talk about what this is. Now, what an EQ does is it takes a signal. So we have a signal, and it shows us, you can see a visual representation of the spectrum. And you can see it's actually labeled low bass, bass, low mid, mid, and you can see where all the C's lie on, so if you want to tune it to be a C or give that frequency more power, you can do that. Also, you also have this down here. This is your frequency range. They have 20 hertz on one end and 10,000. It actually peaks out at 20,000 hertz at this line right here on the other end. So those are the two extremes. And you can see that it is a logarithmic scale. So it goes 20 to 50, this whole space. Then you have 50 to 100 in this space, so quite a bit more. And then you have 100 to 200, so that's double what's in here, two of these and one of these. And then from 200 to 500, 501K, and so on, until you get to the point where there's more frequencies in this area or in this area than there are in all the other ones combined. And so that's the power of a logarithmic scale. But you can see our frequencies represented in the darker, or not darker per se, but brighter, more pink lines. That is our stronger signal. So if I were to play a note like a saw wave, you see that these bright areas, it's pretty evenly loud throughout the entire spectrum because all the bands, all these lines are really bright. And the bands represent the frequencies. So we have our frequencies going across, and the up and down represents volume. So you also have these notches in the middle, and what these do is they allow you to change the volume of the frequency at a specific frequency range. So we could click and drag these numbers right here, and they have a fancy name. I forgot what they are. Those switches, something. Band tokens. That's what they're called. It told me up here. And you could turn those on and off by this check mark down here. On, off, on. And that's just the numbers, really. You could still move around the bands and stuff. It's just the numbers disappear, and they correlate to these sliders over here. So what a parametric EQ is it allows you to change the volume like this, but what makes it parametric is you can actually move the entire, you could select the frequency you want with your token, and you can change the bandwidth, which is how wide this thing is, so how many frequencies it affects. And you can do that by hovering over the token and scrolling up and down. There's actually like 3 ways to do this, but this is the way I've always used, so I don't really know the other two. And as you can see, we can make it really short, really small band, or really large band, affecting a lot of frequencies and really gradually taking the volume off. This is called Q. So the width of this band is called our Q factor. And when you go read about it, you'll probably read about Q. I believe smaller Q is a bigger band, and wider Q is a smaller band. So like this would be a Q of 1 versus this would be like a Q of 10. I may have that completely backwards. It may just be backwards. So if you go reading about it, though, that's what they're referring to. I'm sure I'll clarify that later as I go. It's one of those things that you remember when you need to remember it. Like really need to remember it. Like you're doing a math equation and you're forced to go look it up. Okay, so that's what those are. And again, you could change the bandwidth by scrolling up and down. And this shape is actually called peaking. And I'm not going to actually talk about the shapes all that much. I have a video called Basic Filter Shapes. Just go ahead and go look that up, and it will show you all the basic filters shapes you can make with this. But this is peaking, where you cut out the volume like so. And then it talks about high shelf and low shelf. So you can right click to get to those menus, by the way, and you have all your various filter shapes. You can reset it back to its default, which is automatically a peaking filter at 0 decibels. So it's not peaking or cutting. And so when you put it above 0 decibels, this is called boosting, and below is called cutting. You can hold down Alt and click to set anything back to its default value also as an alternative. And if you right click, you go to order, and you have these different options. You have steep 8, 2, and then you have gentle 8, gentle 6. you have all these different steepnesses and stuff. What this is a reference to is the volume cut that can happen, and also the curve that you have. So if we go to a steep 8, you'll see our curve becomes much sharper, and there's even a flat, it even flattens out right here. So the cut that happens is much greater than if it were not, if it was like a gentle 6. As you can see, it's a nicer curve. It's smooth. So, and so these things correlate, these tokens correlate over here, and this is 1, 2, and by default, the guys in the middle are peaking, set to peaking, and these guys are set to low shelf. So this is a low shelf, so it'll boost the low end on. You can change it, of course, by right-clicking, and this is a high shelf. So those are your options there, and you can move them up and down via this guy. So you could boost or cut this way, and you can also move the entire line up or down, and then whatever you do with these guys is now relative to wherever that line is set. And when you hit Alt-click, you have to hit the Alt on the right side of your keyboard. Hold down Alt while you're doing that. The left side of the keyboard doesn't do that. Oh, no, it does do that. You know what? Never mind. For some things, only the right side one works because the other Alt does some other shortcut. So it's kind of weird. Anyways, we have our different shapes right here. If you come up here and click and drag, you could scroll through them as an alternative to right clicking. And you can also change the steepness by this box right here. So if we put our 4 down, and we'll change the steepness, and you can change the box, these boxes right here, the steepness. So, you know, very steep, not very steep, and filled in is gentle, and hollow is the steep. So that is what those are. And again, you move them up or down. You can change where they are side to side by clicking and dragging the tokens, or you could just, you know, click and drag. And you could change the bandwidth with this second slider down here. You see it's labeled bandwidth, and this is labeled the frequency selection. And so if you plan to automate this is what you would automate to go back and forth like so. And that's what it is. It's pretty much the same for all of those. You could cut up to 18 decibels, but the steepness also has something to say about okay, so let me just demonstrate it. There's so we're on our Fruity Parametric EQ2, and it actually has presets. I don't know if you knew this, but they've got a whole bunch of different presets. And then we have our default, and there are some other options. One day I'll cover this and what it does, because there are actually some pretty cool ideas over there. But let's go to a preset. One in particular is called Old Telephone. And you'll notice that all these guys are being cut down, but they're still there. And we have our big band, and so only the spectrum content in this band will be heard. And this is as loud as it can get. So at 1909 hertz, we will have a boost of over 6 decibels. You see that we still have our tokens down here, though, and the steepness affects the volume cut. Even though this says 18 decibels, it's a little weird. So to demonstrate this, first I'm going to show you the frequency that we're at. So if we turn it up, that's the frequency we're going to be affecting. And you have to listen real close. If you don't have good monitors, you won't be able to hear this. That's how subtle this is. But right now it's on EQ2, 2. And if we go to Steep 8, it cuts it out more. Go read the manual, okay? It talks about it in the manual, how the different steepnesses affect the volume, but it does. So usually it's pretty visually represented, and you're going to be using your ears to do this anyways, but I just wanted to point that out because it's an interesting thing that goes on. A filter would reduce it to negative infinity, whatever, on, at least that was like the major difference between filters back in the day. Some filters may not reduce it all the way in decibels because they're doing weird things now. But anyways, that's going on, just so you know about that. So let's talk about some of our other options. Let's go back to default, by the way. That way you can start messing with your various things. So you have this this menu right here. We're going to talk about this last, actually. You have high quality, which has to do with it oversamples your signal. So higher frequency content will be more accurately represented. It does take up more CPU, however. If you don't know what oversampling is, then go check out my DSP video, oversampling and anti-aliasing, and you'll learn a bunch of valuable stuff about rendering out songs as well. But I don't specifically address rendering there, but the principles apply. So this is what this does anyways. It oversamples, making your higher end more faithfully reproduced. I believe when it renders, it automatically does the resampling, so you don't need to worry about it. But it may be something you want while you're working. It could matter, and you'll see why when you go watch the video. This check mark just turns on and off your, what are these again? Band tokens. Your band tokens, as we talked about. And this monitor, this changes what this does. So if we select this like line right here, we get no preview of our audio, but it still affects our audio. We just don't see it in here. I have no idea why you'd want to do that, but it's an option. Then you have your original signal will always be previewed regardless of what changes you make to the sound. So if the animation is always consistent. It shows us the original signal going in. And then the circle shows us the signal going out, the affected signal. And you can see the changes being reflected. I use that one. However, I do see applications for using this one. But anyways, so that's what monitor does. And then you have this compare option right here. And this is actually a pretty nifty setting. So this has to do with spare state. So a computer, it's sort of like copy and paste. You can hit Control-C over a thing of text and copy it into a spare state in your computer system. And then later on, you could say, hey, bring back that data so that I can see it here. And as soon as you hit Control-C over something else, it gets overwritten with your new data. Well, this is the same way. So we can make an EQ change. And when we hit down, the down arrow, it says, put this in the spare state. And so we click down, and now it's in our spare state. That's our sound. Like maybe we want to toggle between sounds to see what it sounds like. Then we can make a change, and we wouldn't want to hit copy again because that wouldn't do what we want. We want to hit compare. So this is our sound now. And if we hit the compare up and down arrow, it switches between the two. But we can make this our spare state by clicking down and then dragging around and then compare that. And so that's what this option does right here. And it's really nifty. Then you have these options over here on this little triangle area. Then you have this option, lock spare state. I'm not 100% sure on how this affects your spare state. At first, I thought it changed it so that it keeps your spare state on whatever you selected it as. But I've gotten weird results from it. I know there's some sort of a pattern thing, but I'm just not patient enough to figure it out because it's not a feature I use all that much. So if you're big into this idea and you figure it out, drop it in the comments or maybe make a video and post it. That'd be cool just to see, you know, exactly how it works. But anyways, you have this option here. You also have high precision monitor. And what this does is it makes your visual representation, your audio is not affected by this. It makes your visual representation just come as really, really crisp and clear and like as accurate as possible. However, you do get a delay. So it is slower, barely, but it can become noticeable. So there's that. And I could see actually applications for slowing it down. Then you have this thing called legacy monitor, which is much lower resolution. As you can see, our kick is now ridiculous. But I think it could be useful for noticing general patterns. Sometimes lowering the resolution allows you to see what's happening easier. And if you combine it with the high precision monitor, it like finds some sort of in between and it's really slow, as you can see. And if we need to analyze a sound, that could be your option for doing that. You'd see exactly what's going on. However, you may not want to do that. Then you have about, and it just has some stuff. Apparently they used a EQ cookbook to make this, which is pretty cool. And that is pretty much the Parametric EQ2 in a nutshell. You might be saying, why? Now let's give a quick mixing lesson super fast. So let's say you've got a kick going and you love your kick. It's doing its job. You have it going to mixer track 1. Led by default, and you have your harmless though, and your harmless is playing around in the bass area. It's doing this. It's actually pretty low, but it's hungry for the same spectral area. And you see our kick and our harmless are fighting each other. They're not happy with one another. So how do we remedy this? Well, our kick has an EQ on it, our parametric EQ, and we have two options. We can cut the volume. So we notice our kick has a big range. If we go over to our harmless. By the way, I have series on harmless and a whole thing on FL for if you have no idea how to do what I'm doing right now. There's a beginner series, how to make your first song in FL. So, and our harmonic is taking up a huge amount of volume, and you see they both want this area. They both say, I have content here. However, our kick may be more important in our song, so we may want that there. Now, ideally, a mix down, a proper like academic mix down, will end up at -6 decibels. So you would cut both anyways quite substantially. And that could fix your problem. Or you could go in and say, hey, I want the kick to shine right here. So you could cut some of this area out. And your kick comes out on top. Now, some of this may just be the genius of how you arrange and what sounds you use and stuff like that. That can make your mixing much easier, but that is also an option. And there are various volume techniques to do this, but as you can see, it is a volume technique. And so that's one way of using the EQ to mix. The other way is you can automate things. So we can make this into some sort of a crazy phaser hole thing, and we could create an automation clip and move it around. And you can hear it. And you could create variations in your sound, and you could use it as a sound design tool. So that's really cool. That is the Parametric EQ. Pretty much everything you need to know about it. The rest is just getting creative and using it wisely. Another thing you could do is you could also automate the bandwidth. And you won't hear anything right now, but you'll see it changing the width, and you can change where it's at the same time by automating this. You can even change the volume by moving this around. I'm not sure if you can automate that. Oh, you can. You can even automate the steepness of the curve. You can literally automate everything. So, like, no excuses for not having enough creative stuff to do. If you have any questions about this, drop it in the comments. And have a blessed day.